The following is a replay episode from the best of the Love in Action podcast. Enjoy.
Hey, it's Marcel. Let me get honest with you for a minute. We've reached a time in history when building up strong leaders truly matters if you want to grow your business. But managing through fear, command and control, and do as I say ways of managing is not going to get you there. So what will? In my research, I found that the most effective leadership boils down to 6 key behaviors. They are behaviors that, when filtered down to every management level, can create high performance in your teams and build a great work culture. By the way, this is the new topic that I speak on at company events and conferences and virtual stages all over the world. It's great for keynotes, webinars, half-day or full-day workshops, and leadership retreats. So if you want to learn a clear and practical framework to help design the best work environment for your people to flourish, this is the way to go, and I can show you how to do it. To book me for your event, visit my website, marcelschwantes.com, and click on Speaking. Enjoy the show.
The future of work isn't about shareholder value, technology, metrics, or automation. It's about being human and putting people first through actionable love. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast, where we hold deep conversations with extraordinary people to help you grow as a leader and expand your business. Here's your host, Marcel Schwantes.
Welcome to another episode of the Love in Action podcast. Glad you're here. Please share this episode with someone in a leadership or management role. And hey, if you like today's show, do us a favor and drop us a positive review and maybe a 5-star rating on iTunes. We would be grateful for that. So I'm excited about today's conversation because I get to bring back a guest that we featured way back on episode 15. And back in those days, we were still crawling and in diapers back then. But, today we get to revisit with the one and only Mark C. Crowley, author of one of those classic leadership books that only comes around every 20 years or so. And that is Lead from the Heart, Transformational Leadership for the 21st Century. That book was written in 2011, and Mark has a newly revised and updated edition that was just released. So this is a book that, if you're just being introduced to it, has given leaders worldwide a roadmap for really driving uncommon employee engagement, productivity, and profitability. Mark C. Crowley has been recognized globally as a workplace thought leader, and his ideas have been called visionary and the future of workplace leadership. He's a renowned speaker, consultant, and a prolific writer. You'll find him in places like Fast Company. He's also the host of Lead from the Heart podcast, heard in 163 countries. And Mark's book, Lead from the Heart, is now being taught at 9 U.S. colleges and universities. And I'm honored that he now joins us. Mark, welcome back, friend, to the Love in Action podcast.
Thank you, Marcel. That was a beautiful introduction. I appreciate that.
It's always an honor to have you. And anytime you want to come back, you just keep knocking on my door, man. It's always going to be open.
Thank you.
So I have so many questions for you about this latest edition, but we have a new tradition since the last time you were here. So it's a kickoff question for listeners to kind of get to know a little bit about you and how you arrived here. You ready?
I'm ready. Throw your question at me.
What's your story?
Oh, wow. That's a big question, actually. And actually, it might be slightly longer than some of your guests because it goes back to my purpose. I honestly believe that I was put on the planet for the purpose of demonstrating to workplace leaders everywhere that there's a far more enlightened way of leading people that just so happens to fly in the face of everything we've been taught about what represents the best management and leadership practices. And so I spent 25 years managing people at very senior levels in what I call a dog-eat-dog world of financial services, because that's what it's like. It's very, very competitive. And I proved that by deeply caring about supporting. I mean, when I first wrote this word nurturing, I was like, oh, Jesus, people are just going to respond so negatively to this. But that's what I was basically doing. I was nurturing people, and they routinely scaled mountains for me. And this truly, Marcel, it was people at every level of the organization. So I started as a management trainee and ended up in 2 national level positions. And everywhere I went, every step of the way, from the time that I graduated from college and started managing people all the way up until I ended that career, people absolutely did phenomenal work for me, beat a path to work for me. And in the last job that I had, I was managing a couple thousand stockbrokers. And I mention them because everyone around me, when I took over this business, they said, oh, you know, the way you manage people, that's not going to work with these people because they just want huge money and they just want to be left alone. And what I proved is what they really wanted was they certainly wanted to make a good living. But what they wanted was my attention, my validation, my coaching, appreciation, and advocacy, all the things that they weren't getting, by the way, from the people that had begun working for me, who've been managing these people for years. We set record performance that year, record profit. I was named leader of the year. And the truth is, it's just popping in my mind now, but I didn't even know I was doing it. I didn't even realize this was so instinctive to me. So inevitably came to believe was that people did these extraordinary things because, like, I literally had this epiphany sitting exactly where I am right now, that people could feel like I was affecting their hearts. And so, like, that's not a good thing. Like, my conclusion was, oh man, I'm in trouble because people are going to think this is like absurd and ridiculous and a joke. Like, you don't bring heart into leadership. And I fully expected that when the book was coming out, that I was going to get a lot of resistance to this thinking. And, you know, when people heard the expression lead from the heart, that they were going to go, oh, this guy's like a religious nut or a spiritualist or someone who doesn't get business. But one thing that happened was colleges started seeing the book and saying we needed to teach this. And they were the ones that embraced this. Where business thought that there's something wrong with me, education saw it as this is going to be the future. So I knew in the process of writing the book that what I needed to do was to prove to people that I was right. And so through what I'll call massive synchronicities and gifts from the universe, I found people, profound studies, repeated confirmation that everything that I had learned and was doing instinctively was actually completely fully aligned to what human beings need in order to thrive and perform. So one of the things that all of a sudden, I know you know this, all of a sudden people are like, 11 years later, 12 years later, people are beginning to use terms like lead from the heart or heart-led leadership or something along that line. And I think the thing that differentiates what I'm talking about and why I chose to call it lead from the heart was because I have science that proves that the heart actually plays an enormous role in influencing human behavior. And if you understand that, then you're going to manage people in a very, very different way.
Yeah. And so I can't wait to get into it, but don't jump the gun yet, because I want to pull you back a little bit. Because I want to understand then that in your corporate world, it's like you kind of almost stumbled into this heart-based leadership by accident because the previous bosses before you were not giving the employees. And how far back are we going, Mark? Is this 1990s?
Yeah.
Right.
No, we're going all the way back to the beginning of my career. The answer is, Marcel, is that when I was 9, my mom died suddenly. And I was raised by my father who, for whatever reason, psychologically and emotionally abused me in a very profound way through the rest of my childhood. And then a couple of days after I graduated from high school, he kicked me out of the house with no money, no support. I never saw him again except for right before he died. And so I went into this very, very dark place, very difficult situation. Obviously, I didn't even have a job where I was making enough money to live, and I had to figure out how to basically survive. But my father used to tell me, you're never going to amount to anything. You're going to be this abject failure. And so I believe that if I didn't graduate from college, that I would end up being exactly that I would be whatever, everything he predicted about me. So I was determined to get through college. And they should have kicked me out in the first couple of years. Literally, I don't know. Like, I literally reached out to a professor who taught me 35 years ago and said, I don't know why you didn't kick me out. And he goes, well, I don't really remember you. I said, I just want you to know how grateful I am because, but I think people saw something in me and they kind of helped me and I got into a rhythm and I actually ended up doing very well in my last couple of years. But when it came time to graduation and I was talking to people that I'm, graduating with, they're all going off to grad school, medical school, law school. And I was just thinking, God, thank God I got through this. Like, I didn't even believe in myself, right?
Yeah.
So I started thinking about, like, what's the difference between them and me? Like, why are they so confident that they could go off to a graduate school when I'm thinking no graduate school is going to want me, even though I could have qualified? I just didn't believe in myself that way. And I started to realize, wait a minute, these people had parents that loved them, cared about them, wanted to know what was going on in their classes, approval, a safe place to go to, all these things that I didn't have. And so what happened was, unconsciously, at 23, 24 years old, when I started managing people seriously for the first time, I started giving people, it was like this fantasy on an unconscious level of, if I give people everything that I always wanted and believed would have made me infinitely more successful, what would happen to them? So this carried on until I was in my 40s when somebody said to me, you manage people very differently. And it was only at that time that I started to put the puzzle pieces together and went, oh my God, like, my whole upbringing shaped me. So it rewired me in a way that is uncommon. And that's why I led people in an uncommon way.
Perfect. And yet so complicated because, Mark, in that pivotal, those developmental years, you could have ended up completely the other way, resentful, distant, and kind of keeping your emotions to yourself, right? Because none of that was modeled for you, or maybe anger was modeled, or, negativity was modeled in the home. A lot of us grow up in these environments where people don't speak truth into us, and parents don't believe in us, and so you acquire a lot of shame growing up. So you don't really think of yourself as highly as other people do until mentors come around and surround us and help to inspire and equip us, right? And then we see, like, our true worth, right? Like, wow, yeah, this is how people see me, and because of our upbringings, we're not able to see beyond our own lenses, which keeps us kind of stuck in this, like, oh, I'm not worthy of leadership, or I'm not worthy of love and care, right? And I think, in your book, you mentioned that in your childhood, because you were not getting enough care and attention modeled in the home, you used to go to your neighbor's house, right? And how instrumental that the mother of that friend of yours was in actually modeling the kind of parental behaviors that you weren't getting in the home. And you talked about how instrumental that was for you growing up, that she kind of believed in you and kind of put that seed in you that said that, you are better than what you think you are, right?
Yeah. By the way, before I answer that question, what you just said was really, really insightful, just about how upbringings occur and their influence on you. But I think, I heard somebody say that things that happen to you either define you or they refine you. So I would love to say, well, I was very conscious in what I did, but I wasn't until much later. And once I understood what I was doing, then I really refined it, and experimented, and really made sure I understood what I was doing and the power of it. So coincidentally, I'm going to New York in a couple of weeks, and I'm actually going to see her. We've remained in contact, and she's actually been helpful in giving me insight for both books. But when I was a kid, and right after my mom died, I think she observed the abuse that I was taking. And one day she just said, I want you to come here every day. You're welcome here. She had 5 children of her own, and yet she still wanted me to be there. And she told me recently, Marcel, that she goes, I looked around the block, like, the neighborhood, and there was nobody else that I trusted to help you. And so I did it myself. And what she did for me, your insight, is that she showed me that I could be someone that I wasn't being told I could be at home. So she gave me a vision that whatever you have in your heart is to who you think you are. I see that inside of you, and I want that Mark to come out, not the Mark that your father is telling you.
And I still see that in young 20-somethings that come into the workplace, and people or leaders are able to see something in them that they don't see in themselves and will bring it out of them, right? And I think that's the strength of if you want to call it a heart-based leader, is see the potential in others and have the belief in them that they don't have in themselves. So anyway, so I think that's a good, that was a nice little sidebar that we just had there. And I guess we can thank Mrs. Whitman, I guess, when next time you see her.
I'll thank her.
So bring back the book because it's revised, updated. I was trying to do a comparison between the two. So how would you say this new edition is different? What did you add? What did you find to add onto it?
Well, as we started talking about earlier, the business world, I was supposed to speak at Amazon with Jeff Bezos in the room. And the last like a couple of days before, they called me up and said, we're going to be doing a smaller meeting and we're not going to have a speaker. And so I knew it sounded fishy, but it was no way I could confirm it. And so about a year ago, somebody from Microsoft asked me to do some work, and he was the same guy at Amazon, and he broke the story to me that at the last minute, one of the senior managers reporting to Jeff Bezos said, "Tell me about the speaker." And he goes, "Oh, he wrote this book. It's called Lead from the Heart." And the guy goes, "We don't need somebody like that. We need kill that guy. We don't need somebody who doesn't understand business." And they just completely dismissed it. So that was painful, right? I mean, what a wonderful opportunity to go and try to influence a company that actually has a pretty dark reputation for leadership. Thought maybe I could go in there and kind of help them, but they weren't up for it at all at the time. But it kind of told me that this was going to be a rough road. And I had other signs of that I'm either going to, and by the way, I paid somebody $10,000. I wrote about this in the book to help me. I had no platform. No one knew who I was when the book was first coming out. She told me I was going to effing fail if I continued to use the word, lead from the heart.
And she wanted you to call it what? Killer engagement?
Killer engagement.
Killer engagement.
Exactly. Right? That's what people want. So I needed to make the decision as to whether or not I was going to keep calling it Lead from the Heart. I actually had a moment to change the title of the book, but the science is the science. It's like, I'm not backing away from that. So to answer your question directly, the difference in the book is everything that I've learned in the last 11 years that validates it. And so it's actually exponential. So what motivated me to write the book was like, you want more proof? Here. You want more proof? Here. You want more proof? But it's cool proof. It's like, I think we all want to believe that this is going to work, but we're so, taught not to, and you don't go there and you don't get caught up in people's messiness, and you sure don't talk about feelings. And it's just patently untrue, and what was really interesting to me was there's a lot of information that actually came out this year, like 3 books that just completely validated the thesis that I was able to get into the new edition.
Okay. What are those books?
Oh, and you're going to ask me that question.
I want to make sure I have it on my list.
Well, they're in the book, so you won't have any problem finding them. Leonard Mlodinow, his book on emotions is one of them. Annie Murphy Paul, which was a New York Times best-selling book. Zoe Chance from Yale. She wrote a book on persuasion that gets into this. Mark Brackett at Yale, his work is phenomenal in terms of validating this. Sigal Barsade, who just passed away, who mentored me through this and kind of helped me understand her research. And then Barbara Fredrickson, of course. So you basically have all that ammunition. It makes the whole message irrefutable at this point. And that was the goal, was to say, this is the moment and you're looking for it because you need it. And it's hard to really argue against it at this point.
Yeah. And don't worry, folks, if you're driving or on the treadmill in the gym, I'm going to make sure that every one of those people Mark just mentioned and their books and their work is listed in my show notes. Okay. So you can visit my website on that. All right, Mark. So here we are. It's September 2022. We've gone through a global pandemic, racial and social unrest, a great resignation, and now social media has decided to rebrand poor leadership and low employee engagement by calling it quiet quitting. So, has leadership changed over the last 2.5 years? If so, how? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's binary. So has leadership changed overall? No. Has leadership changed with people who the light bulb went off? Yes. So there are people that went through COVID, started managing people remotely, and started to realize that, hey, I just can't call them at 8:30 and go, where are you on this project, when they got kids running around or going to homeschool, or the spouses, arguing over who's going to use the office today. You have to be much more thoughtful about people, right? So I think that those managers who realized that caring about people, being empathetic about their life situation, understanding what challenges they have, actually simply asking them, is this a good time for us to talk? Like, what would be a good time for us to talk with everything going on in your life? That affects the heart. When you're that thoughtful and you're that caring, people go, wow, I can't believe my manager would even think to ask that question. But there were others that didn't do any of this, that want people back in the office because they like to command and control. But what's interesting to me about the other part of your question, which is, I'm just going to speak in the vernacular, Marcel. We haven't given a shit about employee engagement in 15 years. Very few companies have done anything with it. And frankly, I think it's a loosey-goosey term that people don't really understand, but really nobody did much. They might do an engagement survey and then they have a skewed system where the numbers look so good and they go, well, I guess we're doing great, even though people are quitting and unhappy. Nobody really wanted to dig into this and make this thing work. So even though Gallup's been talking about this for a really long time, what they did, Gallup did, was they co-opted this, I think it was TikTok, that wherever it was that the person first said this, right? So they go, I'm quiet quitting, which is, I'm only doing my job. I'm not giving them extra hours, and I'm not being on my phone at night and the weekends. And people got all excited about that. Well, if you look at Gallup, if you go on Gallup and look at their engagement graphs now that they update every month, it no longer says not engaged. It says quiet quitters. So they have cleverly co-opted this. And the reason is because quiet quitting is a lot sexier now and a much more advancing of their narrative, which is only 30% of people are engaged, than they could ever get people. So now everybody's talking about quiet quitting. So even Gallup is calling it, but it's the same damn thing we've been talking about for 15 years.
Yep. Oh boy. So Mark, I want to transition. You know how in every movie, well, every good movie, you're kind of like, tracking along with the story, and all of a sudden there's a twist to the plot and it almost catches you by surprise. So hopefully this is the moment where we catch our listeners by surprise. So I want to explore the concept of leading from the heart, because people, they read the title and they think lead from the heart it's a metaphor. So just like, kindness and compassion, they don't see the actual science behind it. They just see it as fuzzy words, right? Metaphorically speaking, yes, we should lead with kindness and compassion, right? But what people don't know is that while the book's title may be sort of a metaphor and it's soft and fuzzy, it's also scientific. So can we go back to your findings on the role that the heart actually plays and how that all connects to leadership and engagement?
So this is like perfectly timed question because you have some background here. So I was having a conversation with a former colleague of mine in financial services who was sort of, keeping track of my process. I told him I was writing a book, and I'm just sort of putting piles together and thinking about what I want to be writing. But I don't have the book I haven't begun the writing process, but I'm telling him I'm getting close. And he goes, you have to explain this to people, right? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, you have to explain why this works. Otherwise, people are going to think you needed a really shitty childhood in order to lead this way. And it was like, these are one of these gifts from the heavens, because when he said it, obviously, I had not given it a moment of thought. I thought people would take me at my word. So he goes, you better figure out what it was you were doing to people and go from there. Well, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I got great results, but I couldn't tell you. I hadn't gone under the hood to kind of put the pieces together. And again, sitting right where I am, is just thinking about like, what was I doing? And I had this epiphany, like, I'm affecting the hearts in people. That's what I was doing. And so at that night, I told my wife, I go, I am so screwed. I have wasted like 10 months of my life. Nobody's ever going to take this seriously. People are going to think this is ridiculous, particularly the people that, that used to work with me that never realized that this is what I've been doing. They just saw I got great results. No one ever said, how is he getting great results? But the minute I came out with a book called Lead from the Heart, I knew they were going to go, oh my God, what happened to him since he's been gone? But it was my wife who said, well, don't you know it's already true? Like, haven't you already proved it to your own experience? So she goes, there has to be evidence. So I was like, oh, thank God. Like, just dusts me off, picks me up, tells me to go back to work. And I start to think about who can help me validate this. And so there's a backstory that's really interesting on how I ended up with this woman, but I'll get to the point, which is that I wrote this woman. She's a world-class cardiosurgeon. She's had her own NPR PBS special recently. She's written 2 best-selling books, and she graduated #1 from her medical school. And I just said, I have this theory that through my experience that I was affecting hearts in people. Could there be any truth in this? So they called me up, said she wants to meet you. She happened to be in my city. So I went in, I walked in, Marcel. She didn't even get out of her chair. She looked at me and she goes, Mr. Crowley, you have figured out something. We're just figuring out ourselves in medicine. And I had tears coming down my eyes. I didn't know what she was going to tell me. I just knew my whole life story was going to be validated. And so she said, I graduated top of my class. And when we were being taught to work on hearts, we were working on cadavers, and all of us medical students didn't want to do it. Like we were squeamish. And so the doctor who was teaching the class goes, don't get caught up in the humanity of the heart. There's nothing there. It's just a pump. Just treat it like a carburetor. And she said, we basically, believed them. And so she said, I started to go into my own practice. And over probably 15 years, I'm talking to people with serious heart problems. And I started to realize they have marital problems, financial problems, great stress in their lives. They overdrink or have an alcohol problem. She said, if the biography is affecting their biology, which it was in 100% of the cases, then what I was taught was incomplete, wasn't true. So she started looking into it, and this is where she said, you figured out something we figured out. She said, I've been doing my own investigation and looking for research, and she introduced me to this organization called the Institute of Heart Math, and they have been studying the intelligence of the heart, like explicitly. That's their mission for 30 years now. And one of the founders, one of these gifts from the universe, still to this moment, don't understand why he did it. He goes, you're onto something. I want to mentor you and I'll help you. And I was like a biology for non-majors guy. So like I didn't have the scientific background, but I was fascinated by it. And so bottom line is that what is emerging now are 2 things. One, that the heart and the mind are actually connected, and the heart sends more communication to the mind than the other way around. So our feelings are influencing our thinking, and our thinking comes from our feelings. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, but he was wrong. We are feeling, sensing organs, and this is what we don't realize, is that what we're sensing at any given moment is influencing our choices and our decisions, which clearly influences how we behave. But there's something else that's going on. We are hardwired as human beings to thrive on positive emotions. And when we have a disproportionately positive, disproportionate experience of positive emotions, say like 4-to-1 or something greater, we are thriving. But as human beings, we know that. But what we also know, this is from the Institute of Heart Math, is that when people are experiencing care, appreciation, safety, somebody is coaching them, someone is thinking of them, somebody is appreciating them, all the things that I did when I was managing people, they end up marinating in positive emotions. And what the Institute of Heart Math has figured out is that it creates something called coherence. It actually puts people into their optimal state of performance. The communication that is going on between the heart and the mind is so ideal that you set people up for incredible performance. So no surprise that people outperform. So Roland McCready, who's the head of research, another founder of the firm, has subsequently told me, he goes, I don't know if you're a genius or you're a lucky guy, but what you figured out is what we have found to be true, which is that everything that you did kept giving people this drip of positive emotions, which kept like gas in the machinery, basically, that kept the coherence going. So he goes, you had people that were loyal, you had people that were high performing, they loved working for you, they were showing you initiative. All of that comes from coherence. And so, like, all by this guy saying to me, you're going to have to explain why this worked, led me to, and this is why the book is called Lead from the Heart, because as you suggested, I know even now that people see the title and they think, oh, there must be something wrong with this guy. But when they understand the science, then I think they realize, okay, you couldn't have called it anything other than that. At least that's my hope.
So I'm going to attempt to at least translate back to you what I heard. Tell me if this is correct. The heart, and this was in your book, by the way, it's a little brain. So the heart actually has intelligence that influences the brain, where we used to think the opposite, right? Heart's just a pump, the brain's in charge, brain's in control. But what the Institute of Heart Math is finding is that a heart actually has the power to influence other parts of us. Well, obviously the cognitive part of us, right? I think that's where coherence comes in. But here's the part that really that I get really geeked up about. I interviewed Dr. Paul Zak, who came on the show, and he's done brain studies on trust. And he says that the more positive feelings we have that leads to trust, the more the brain releases oxytocin and serotonin.
Oxytocin.
Right.
One of the things that we're discovering is that things that we've always thought were not necessarily necessary, or in fact, historically, we were basically told, don't give a shit about people. That's not your job as a manager. Your job is to get the work done. So you pay people to do their job. And if they do a good job, you give them a little bit more. And if they don't do a good job, you get rid of them and you find someone in there. And that's always been the transaction. But now what we're finding is obviously that model no longer works because nobody wants to work for somebody that treats them that way. But what we're also discovering is that things like kindness, things like compassion, they actually have a biological impact on us. So Zak's work shows you that it creates trust. But when you're kind to somebody, it changes your chemical nature, right? Your whole body. By the way, there's intelligence through our cellular. There are neural cells throughout the body, including in the heart. So when we are kind to someone, we think, well, that's an unnecessary thing. But it's not if you really want to support people in a way that affects them at their deepest spiritual level. And spiritual, I don't mean in the woo-woo sense. I mean literally in their human spirit. Like, it makes people feel that. So I think he's onto something different in terms of oxytocin. But let's face it, if you do anything that establishes trust with people and you get a biological reaction vis-a-vis oxytocin through your system, why wouldn't you want to do more of that for people? That's really the takeaway. If you know that people are optimally performing when you're kind, when you demonstrate compassion, when you care about them, when you demonstrate, like, I'll give you an example. I've always read a lot. I read at least a book a week and have for 40 years. So what I used to do and still do for myself was to type up notes. So I would read the book, I'd write all over the book, and then I would sit down with the computer and I'd type out the notes. And when I'm on airplanes and stuff, or just, have time, I'll just grab some. And it just reminds me of the book and, make sure that you internalize the information. And so I started thinking, well, if I'm doing this for myself, I might as well just give these to my people, like to my employees, and say, hey, I spent all Sunday reading this book. You don't need to, but read these notes and let's talk about it. And I mean, I still get notes from people saying, those discussions completely changed me. in terms of how we thought, because you're taking in other people's information, you're discussing it, and you're elevating and understanding. But what they were telling me was, like, you think about me on a Sunday, like you would do this for me? Like, who does that? And that has a biological impact on people.
We need to change the Heart's job description, Mark, from just a pump, like you said, like a carburetor, to giving it to a description for what it's worth. Now that science has found that it's intelligence, and it relays information, it communicates to the brain, right, and even influences the brain.
Well, 6 or 7 years ago, I wrote an article with Gallup and basically laid out that I don't think we should use the term manager ever again. I think we should be calling people coaches. And the reason is because a coach's orientation is automatically you're there to help other people succeed. A manager has a different orientation altogether, right? So I think there's a big element of this in business. Like if you talk to particularly men about management, like they hate that. Like, I don't want to have to care about people. I don't want to. So I'm already pushing people in a way that's painful for them. The last thing that you want is this Valentine heart. But that, unfortunately, is the association that a lot of people have. And so there's this hurdle that you have to get over. And so this is where your audience comes in, is for them to say, hey, wait a minute, like this is not a metaphor. This is scientific. This is how human beings are wired. And if you just grow up and mature a little bit and get beyond the word heart, you'll realize that you can be infinitely more successful as a manager and a leader if you adopt these practices, because this is what human beings need. But it's also what people have grown to want. Like, without like knowing, they're just like, I'm not happy because I'm not getting something. And it's all the things we're talking about.
Mark, I want to get into practices, and, books have frameworks and ideas on how to implement leadership practices. And you have these 4 practices of leading from the heart. Walk us through each one of them, and then tell us, which of the 4 may be the one that we fail at the most as managers.
Okay, so I'll go through them quickly because I want to get to your last question, because I think somebody just told me this story that I just couldn't believe, but it pins down your question. So there are 4 practices, and truthfully, Marcel, you know the book, you read them both. It's much more than 4 practices. It's a whole gestalt of how we operate and how we think and what our intentions are. But the first is really hiring from the heart, which is recognizing that people are, just because you have an opening doesn't mean somebody who comes to you and says that they want the job is a good fit for it. Sometimes people just want the job because their friend works there, or because they need a job and they need money and you have an opening. And so what I've discovered is that there's a laziness sometimes of, we'll just take that person, as opposed to really confirming that they have a genuine interest in doing the work that you do in the way you do it. And so, I remember driving in the road one day and I saw this guy driving one of those trucks with the the steamrollers, laying down asphalt. And it was a hot day. And I'm like, why would anybody want to do that? And it's because there's joy there for somebody that's like, hey, look what I'm doing. I'm late paving roads. And when you drive down a road, I'm the guy who did it. So people are willing to do all kinds of jobs. You just have to make sure that you're putting the person who loves to do that kind of work. And, one of the things that I've always found was that if you involve the people who are already excelling in it in the interview process, they can then show you that person's not going to make it, because we know it. We know the job, we know the style, we know the personality. And so this is starting off with having a high performing team means using great discipline in how you hire. The next one is building a personal relationship, which when I first started writing it, I was like, people are just going to think I'm completely crazy by this. But it's really not having them over for Sunday dinner or going out and drinking beer all night with your employees. It's understanding. So if you work for me, Marcel, I would set up time regularly to say to you, this time is for you. Tell me what you need, what's going on in your life. how I can support you, what your career aspirations are, what you would like to learn, and everybody's different. So historically, it was the manager was my way or the highway, and you're going to adopt to me. And I'm saying, no, you have to adopt to them. So you have to know what's important to them and then support them as best as you possibly can. That creates trust, but it also is that advocacy. It's like, who doesn't want to work for a boss that says, okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to let you spend some time over in this department, or we're going to teach you this new skill, or I'm going to send you to class, or whatever. I'm going to coach you. Whatever you're doing, you're dripping those positive emotions because you're investing in people. The next one is really about something that companies are horrible at doing right now. Like they don't want to spend any money on developing people, particularly, interestingly enough, and ironically, because so many people are quitting in the Great Resignation. They're like, why do we want to spend money? Because these people are going to just take what they learn and go somewhere else. And of course, my argument is that they won't go somewhere else if you would make the investment in them, if they feel like you really see a future for them. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a corporate sponsored training program. It's really like, what can you teach them? So if you're a manager, you pretty much know something about what these people do all day. So teach them, coach them, give them your time. Something that people don't realize is that just having time with their boss signifies that they matter to you, that you value them, or you wouldn't do it. So making that commitment creates all these positive feelings in people. And then finally, and I go into depth on all of these and why they're important, and I'm giving them sort of short shrift here, but the final one is recognition. And so here's the story, and then I'll back up and tell you the rest of it. But the guy that I used to work with told me just yesterday that the company had a recognition day. Like, we should be recognizing people like on a day. And not only that, but like not normally, not regularly, but like today is recognition day, and then we forget about it until the next recognition day, which is complete lunacy. But not only that, but that the company has to tell their managers, today is recognition day, so you need to do something for your people. And his story was that his manager was so bad at this, like it was so uncomfortable for her to recognize people, that she went and got like plastic, like when you go tailgating, those red plastic cups, and she filled them with dumb lollipops, and that was like her recognition. And I'm like, hey, thanks everyone, you should be good for another year here. So the point is that we think we do a really good job of this, but there's actually a really significant gap between what people feel from their manager and what managers think they're doing for them. So I'll punctuate it by saying this, that you cannot over appreciate people. You cannot, unless, Marcel, you're great, Marcel, you're great, Marcel, you're great, which nobody's going to do. That's not real world. It's if you do something, if you meet a goal and I go, hey, that's fantastic, Marcel, thank you, congratulations. Or you share an insight with me and I go, that's the idea I was looking for, thank you. But we feel like we have to go into our wallets every time we give somebody recognition. So by thanking now, like, if you do something else that I think is great, well, I'm not going to thank him because, he's going to start to take advantage of me. Well, you've been thanking me a lot, so I deserve a raise, or whatever fantasy they have. And exactly the opposite happens. When people feel appreciated that way, genuinely, repeatedly, routinely, they're like, okay, I want to do more for them. We get more from people that we appreciate than we get from people that we don't appreciate. And for whatever reason, this is a high hurdle for a lot of managers.
Wow. Mark, you and I are sort of on a crusade, I feel, not just you and I, but many, many other people that advocate for love and care and compassion and empathy and all that stuff. But, there's a lot of resistance too. And so I think that's because we have been traditionally taught that caring about our people, our employees, may hurt your business. It harms productivity. It's caring too much means that you have just handed the keys to the asylum to the inmates, right? Whatever that saying goes. Ken Blanchard's really good at that, handing the keys to the inmates. So now they run the prison kind of thing. And a lot of managers or, people up in the C-suite, the decision makers, still think of too much care it could really set you back business-wise, it even hurt the bottom line. So I want you to convince the skeptics, right? What would you tell them, Mark? I mean, that about how this simply isn't true anymore. I mean, we could bring the science into discussion, but what would you normally say to a skeptic if you were sitting in the C-suite right now?
I'm well practiced at this because, I've taken a lot of punches in the stomach over the last dozen years.
And other places.
From people that, yeah, right, exactly. And, some of those are permanent wounds. But I mean, this has been a painful journey in the sense that, when I look at it, I mean, in the original book, I was like, what are you arguing with? But it's not what they're arguing with. It's that they're not realizing what they're arguing against. Arguing against an old ideal, which is you keep feelings and emotions out of work. You don't get personal with people. You just treat them like a commodity, like a robot. And that's the relationship that we have. And so when they hear heart, they just immediately dismiss it. And we've talked about that. So the argument that I would make, and it's a wonderful question because it's something that your listeners need to understand. I'm not talking about lead from the heart all the time. I mean, well, that's an inarticulate way of saying it. What I mean is that it's not all heart. It's heart and mind. They work together. We have two forms of intelligence. We've marginalized the heart forever. We said, keep the heart the hell out of business, keep heart out of leadership. And I'm saying, well, you're handicapping yourself. You're tying one arm behind your back. Why would you do that? But what I'm saying to CEOs specifically is the new model. Who we need to be managing are people who definitely know how to drive performance. Like they're going to meet the goals, whatever you assign for them. And they're going to care about their people because it's like the goose that laid the golden egg. If all you do is ask people to produce, and you don't do the other aspect of this is what's led to, 70, 80 million people quitting their jobs. Like everybody had the same epiphany all over the world after COVID that I'm not putting up with this shit anymore. And I'm going to go, and you know what? And if I go somewhere else and they don't treat me the way I need to be treated, I'm going to keep going. So we hear about people going back to their places. They're not going back to they're not going back where they were mistreated. They're going to another place, and they're desperately looking to be led this way. So if you want to limit your turnover, if you want to inspire people to contribute and to be loyal to your organization, then pull out anybody who manages people who can't do both. And we've had this tolerance for people who did, they got the numbers, but they kill their people in the process. And we look away, and human resources departments look away, and they go, well, we can't do anything about him because he gets results. That's bullshit. I mean, you have to say you're going to have to do both. And if you want to continue to lead in this company and be a manager, you're going to have to rise to the occasion, and we'll teach you. And this is what you need to learn to do. But if you're going to bring a red plastic cup with dum-dums to thank people, you're probably not going to cut it here. And I know that sounds very dramatic, but I really believe that. Like, that's what I'm telling CEOs. It's both. So we're not going to turn it into a love fest where everybody's singing Kumbaya and nobody's getting any work done. If you ask people who work for me to what's the one word that you would use to describe Mark Crowley? You would say, well, he's the heart guy. So everybody's going to go heart, heart, heart. And they wouldn't. Marcel, they would go, he's the most demanding guy I ever worked for. Because if you're supporting people in a way that I was supporting people, I'm elevating people to levels that nobody of my peers were doing. People were like loving going to work. So I said, well, then let's not do average production. And if you're connecting rewards so that people are getting something for doing more, which is a huge gap in business. It's like we want people to do more, but we're not willing to give them a share of the benefits of that. If you're connecting that to them, then, which of course I was, then people are like, hell yeah, let's do this. So that's the message, is that this actually drives better performance than you're getting right now because people are operating at a suboptimal level.
Yeah. And it crosses over to the employee side. When you lead with both heart and mind, it also stimulates employees not only emotionally, but also intellectually. So they're emotionally and intellectually engaged in the work that they do. So, I mean, it comes full circle, like both the heart and the mind are involved.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Wow. That was a good mic drop moment for you, Mark.
That's funny.
I was thinking maybe I should just cut the episode right there. They'll be like, boom, and then we're done. And then all right. So as we wind down here, Mark, what do you ultimately hope? Speaking of mic drop moments, maybe here's one coming. What do you ultimately hope people get out of this book?
That they can be massively more successful as a manager and a leader by learning methodologies that, honestly, people have said to me, like, one consistent piece of feedback that people have given me over the years is, you just gave me permission to manage the way I've always wanted to, but never believed that I could. And I think that's really what the takeaway is. So when you read the book, you're like, that's true, that's true, that's true. At some point, it hits you like, this isn't just true, but like this is a much more satisfying way to lead. I remember it was somebody that I work with, that several of my peers work with, and he ended up going to another organization, and he came back to recruit us. And so one by one, we all said, I'm not working for him again. I'm not working for him again. I'm not leaving this, no matter what he's offering, to go work for that guy again. And who wants that as their legacy? So yeah, you got numbers and you got results, but as the years go by, those become less and less important. They're important in the moment, but I don't remember the numbers that I got. All I remember is people writing me letters today saying, the impact that you had on my life because of how you led, I can't thank you enough. That's what sustains you. And so it's sort of like this perfect situation where these methods not only translate into what businesses want you to do, but people want you to do. And so you're getting the results that you want in a way that is aligned to human nature, as opposed to the way we've been managing people for over a century, where we try to squeeze as much out of them as possible, pay them as little as possible, treat them like an adversary. You look at what Starbucks has done over the last 6 months and how they're treating these employees that they mistreated for over 2 or 3 years during COVID, and then they decide to unionize. And then Starbucks declares war against these people. And if they could just step back and realize they're human beings, they're not getting their needs met, they're incredibly sad and unhappy. And if you could return to the way you built the company and start caring about people, they're not going to have any interest in unionizing. But the minute you fight them unionizing, instead of saying, how do we solve this? And go ahead and unionize. But let's work together so that maybe 3 years from now, you get rid of that and we come back to our normal relationship. That's how you do it. You work with people and you make people feel like they're truly part of the organization, instead of like, we got to kill these guys and we got to threaten these people and they're firing people who are involved. And it's like, all that does is spread the illness throughout the organization where nobody trusts. So long answer to your question. It's just a much more enlightened way to lead people.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark, I pose you the leadership love questions tradition on the show. And this is sort of like for the person that really studies leadership from this perspective that you and I teach and coach on, right? It's that for that person that's like maybe sitting at the edge of their chair every episode, they're like, okay, I'm ready for this one. So here it is. Of all the ideas discussed, or maybe something that has not been covered yet, perhaps even from your own podcast, in your own words, how do we lead with love day in and day out?
Many years ago, I was giving a speech, like one of the world's top insurance companies, and particularly in America. And the CEO, when I was done, he stood up and he goes, Mr. Crowley, could you give everyone one sentence summary of your message to lock down into our memories? And I thought it was a great question, but I wasn't ready for it. I just, hadn't really thought of it. And I just go, love your people. And I looked in the audience and these people were like squirming, like I had said, I've got leprosy, everyone, it was just like the worst thing that I could have done. And so I'm instinctively responding to them. And so I just go, but it's business love. like that's a thing. Like that was just like a ridiculous response. But what I was trying to convey inarticulately was like I was trying to soften the blow. And so that, like, I lost them with love your people. Honestly, I lost them, and I don't think I recovered because they weren't ready for this message to begin with. But I left there thinking I'm never going to do that again. And so for over a decade, in every speech, even it's the last thing I say on my podcast, I say, love your people, because this is, I think this, if you've read the book, so you know this, but your audience, I think, will be blown away by this, as I was. So what I've learned is that any act of kindness or coaching or validation or appreciation, like you being thoughtful with people, respecting them, giving them your attention, all these things, they're micro but full manifestations of love. And so what I've learned is that the experience of those positive emotions, so think about everything we've talked about during this conversation, all of the validation that I've gotten comes to the same exact conclusion, that when you give people these experiences, when you're kind and supportive and caring and all these things, that you're giving something to people that they feel. But Barbara Fredrickson, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, she goes, did you ever realize that what you were doing was loving your people? And I said, what do you mean? She said, of course I did. But she said, what we've discovered, what she's discovered, is that any experience of positive emotions is an experience of love. So appreciation is love, interest is love, awe is love. So when I say love your people, I'm saying put your grown-up pants on and take this word as a human need, not the romantic heart on the laptop thing that most people construe it. So if you can grow up around this and say, love your people, but you never have to go up. I don't have to go up to you, Marcel, and go, I love you. I love you. That's not what I'm doing. I'm showing it to you. I'm demonstrating it to you. I'm making you feel safe. I'm telling you how proud I am of you. I'm telling you how grateful I am that I hired you. I'm giving you opportunities to grow. I'm appreciating you. I'm doing all these things. Drip, 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 drip of love. So that's how I learned love your people.
Man, I love that. No pun intended. But listen, I want to make sure, I don't know when I'll have you back for the third time, and it's going to happen. So I don't want to leave any important issue here or any important stone unturned. So is there any question that I should have asked? I'm not like the most prolific interviewer in the world, so cut me some slack here, Mark. but I mean, anything we should touch on that I missed?
I honestly, you've asked some really, really good questions, and I want to compliment you because you've read the book, you understand the book, and you've done a really good job of really bringing out the best information and the things that I think we all think your audience wants to hear and needs to hear. So I'm going to actually leave it with that as a compliment. I think you did a really good job.
Thank you, Mark. With that said, we bring it home with two traditional questions. Here they are, Mark.
Uh-oh.
Personally.
More surprises.
What is really tugging at your heart right now that you would like us to know?
Tugging at my heart. When I wrote this 11 years ago, I truly thought that the world was going to throw me a parade, like laying it out, that these pieces, and by the way, and reward me for like a very painful life experience, right? So I learned this in a very corrupt way, and I paid a dear price for how I was raised and lived and got to where I got to. But I felt that I was giving people a gift, which is, look at this, look what I learned through this. So this has meaning to me, but it has meaning to you. And I think it's sort of like window, when you go to a department store on Fifth Avenue in New York and you look in the windows, but you don't go in the store, you go, oh, I think I'd look wonderful in that suit, or I think I'd look wonderful in that dress, but you don't go in and actually buy the dress and buy the suit and go in and actually live it. So the answer to your question is, we can't talk about this anymore. We have to live it. Like, man up, woman up, and do this, even if you're not being managed this way. because I'm not getting any longer in the tooth here every day. And I really want to see this happen in my lifetime. And the thing is that people are clamoring for this. So you don't have to excuse it anymore. You don't have to, you're going to be rewarded for it. Just have the courage to start leading this way.
Mm. Beautifully put. And finally, you get to bring us home your way, Mark, with a closing remark, a key takeaway to keep us inspired. How would you like to end this?
Two things, actually. One is years ago, I had one of those bells that you ring, like if you go into the post office and you ring the bell and then so I call it the plug bell. So I'm going to make the appeal that I would love it if your audience at least take a look at the book. This change needs support. And as you said earlier, it's a movement. And I would love it if you would take a look at the book and buy it for yourself or your team or both. But I think the final thing that I would remind people of is that you can't fake this. Like, you have to be in your heart. So ask yourself, first question, I think, is the most essential question to ask yourself as a manager is, do I love people? Do I love people enough to want to see them succeed, to thrive, to grow? Because a lot of people, not just managers, have an orientation which is about themselves. Like, I'm more interested in my own recognition and my own pay, my own bonuses, my own career growth. And I'm not really concerned about yours. More importantly, as a manager, I might be even threatened by yours because I don't want you taking my job. So I'm going to push you back down. If you don't have an inclination to be truly an advocate for people, like where you're so secure in yourself and your own abilities that you're not threatened by other people, then keep managing because we need you. But if through this question, you go, you know what? I don't really like it. I don't like the messiness of people. If I was asked to recognize people, I would have a red plastic cup and dum-dum lollipops. I wouldn't know what else to do. So go back and being an individual contributor and find ways to succeed in your career that way. Because I think it really starts there. If you love people, if you fundamentally care about other people and like seeing people succeed, which I happen to feel is the most fulfilling part of leadership, then keep going. And if you don't, you go, you know what? I'm going to go back and do something that makes me personally fulfilled. And I'm not going to worry about other people and managing other people because I just don't enjoy it.
Another mic drop. I'm going to give the sound effect this time. I don't know if that came through or not. Oh, wow. Yeah. Mark, always an honor to speak with you. I want to send 100,000 listeners to go get your book right now. What's a good place to do it? And where can they find you?
Amazon.com is the cheapest and the easiest way to buy books, and some people don't like them. So if you go to my website, there are other places. Target has it, Barnes & Noble has it, any bookstore has it. And my website is markccrowley.com. Again, markccrowley.com. There's a C in the middle. And everything about me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, obviously. I have a podcast. You can find me, Lead from the Heart. Google that, and I'll come up.
Yeah. And that's Mark with a K. Mark C. Yeah. Mark with a K. Well, I'm going to end it like this, Mark. I'm just going to say like it is. Mark's book is truly a leadership classic. This is not copywriting. It's not PR lingo. I really mean that from the heart. And one that you, my dear listener, should have on your bookshelf. So I want to thank Mark for hanging out with us today, and we are all better for it. Thank you, sir.
I'm very, very honored, Marcel. Thank you so very much.
That wraps it up. Thank you, Love in Action Tribe, for joining the conversation as always. And you can keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast. And look for my show notes on my website, marcelschwantes.com. And finally, hey, we're always looking for sponsors to help spread the Love in Action movement globally. If you have an interest, reach me on my website or find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your business grow.